Thinks it's starting. Okay. Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is enterprise mobile. We'll be talking about some of the most forward-looking strategies for mobile in your enterprise or business. To talk about that, we have a clear thought leader in the field, Maribel Lopez, founder and principal of Lopez Research. Hello to you, Maribel.
Hello, James. How are you?
Good, good. I know, I think you've been very busy towards the end of 2015, which I hope means you've had a great banner year for 2015.
It's been a great year. Everybody wants to talk about mobile, cloud, technology changes. It's been fabulous.
Yeah. Would you say that for your own personal business, 2015 has been busier than the past years, or it's all been a blur for the last several years?
Um, it has been very busy for the last several years, but I'd say that 2015 was a banner year for people thinking about embracing technologies like mobile.
Yeah, makes a lot of
Oh,
sense. So, enterprise mobile, I know you've been thinking a lot about mobile and cloud computing for some time now, talking about that. And recently, you've been talking about digital transformation. And what does that mean in terms of mobile in the enterprise?
yeah, I think we really started this conversation around mobile to be a lot about devices, a lot about connectivity. And now I think people are thinking more about what's the business process, not just recreating something they have today, which was sort of what I would call mobile 1.0, mobile 2.0.
Mhm.
Mobile 3.0 is really about let's get a brand new enhanced business process going. It's contextual, it understands location, it uses cameras, it uses sensors. That's different than what we had today and frankly what we had in the past.
I'm hearing Internet of Things in there somewhere.
Internet of Things is definitely in there. I mean, I think that the phone is one example of a device that has sensors in it, but we're actually seeing a lot of maybe more fixed devices that have sensors in them that people want to take advantage of, and
Mhm.
just a lot of data.
Right.
So that's what I think digital transformation is starting to be about in my world.
What about the idea of combining mobile with other trends in the enterprise? I mean, you think
Right.
about in the previous times, I think companies thought about mobile a lot in isolation, and now that those days of silo are a thing of the past. I mean, what about this integration that hopefully is going on?
Yeah, so I think this has been a big trend that just started to happen towards the end of this year, frankly. Um, I've been talking a lot about it. You've been talking about a lot about it. We've seen this concept of silos. You've got companies off building a cloud strategy. You've got companies off building a big data strategy. You've got companies off building a mobile strategy. But all of those were really about making the technology present, first of all, cheaper in many ways, right? And
Wait, when you say cheaper, you mean mobile itself, or what is the cheaper element of there?
well, so for example, I think a lot of people embrace cloud computing because it was cheaper infrastructure that could be scaled,
Right.
and virtualization was a very similar thing. So, you usually go into technologies because they're better, faster, cheaper, and you usually don't get all three of them combined, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
but in this case, I think we have a real opportunity where people are saying, okay, they've done sort of that base level of deployment, and even the vendors have gotten to a point where they have much more mature products now than they had 2, 3 years ago. So what does that mean? It means that if people are thinking about, okay, mobile, for example, isn't just about email and calendar. If mobile's about a business process and changing a business process, that process now has elements of where does the data live? Does it live in the cloud? Does it live on your premise? It has elements of, is that software as a service? Is that how you're doing it these days?
Hmm.
It has elements of taking a bunch of new data that you didn't have before and analyzing it perhaps in real time and presenting that on many different types of devices. And when you think of that, that's not just a mobile strategy or a cloud strategy or an analytics strategy. It's really taking those four pillars, which are big data and analytics, cloud computing, mobility, and I would also put security in there right now
Hmm.
because you have to secure all this regardless of where it lives. And it's sort of an underpinning foundational thing. But it's about those four things kind of converging so that you can actually deliver a new and better process.
It sounds like it's amazingly hard, and I can just imagine some business executives out there going, "Oh no, there's no way we could combine all that. Just doing each one of those
Yeah.
in isolation is hard enough. Now
Yeah.
we're supposed to integrate that? Like, oh no, is that even
Right.
possible?"
I think two things are happening there, right? I think the first thing that's happening is if you get the right thought leader, they have to come up with this vision first, right? So many companies are still in the islands. But if you decide that you want to be brave and move forward with this, one of the things you're starting to see happen is that the vendors are actually creating platforms. So what was discrete technology, we're seeing a lot of merger and acquisition all up and down the stack. You know, you've had networking companies like Cisco buying big data companies like ParStream. You've had Amazon announce IoT platforms and made some of their own acquisitions.
Mhm.
You've had consolidation in the mobile space in terms of development platforms and basically creating things that do backend as a service, that do mobile app development tools. So they're just creating a platform within their zone, and some of those platforms are starting to work with each other.
Well, does that mean that you, if you're advising a business or an enterprise about how to combine these things, that you would recommend to them that they buy a pre-configured or pre-put together option, or try to do it themselves? How does that work into it?
Yeah, I don't think there's like any really nice, like you just drop it in a box and it's done, it ships to you on a pallet. I mean, in a great world, that would be, right? But
Right. I was dreaming of that. I was kind of hoping that existed. I wish the answer is, oh yeah, just go get this. It's 9.95. It's easy. Don't worry about
you know what, James? If it existed, we wouldn't have jobs. So there you go.
it.
Something good
Oh,
to be
good.
said
Oh,
about that.
good.
We get to live another day. No, but what I would suggest is that we're moving out of this concept of where you have to buy everything best of breed and become your own systems integrator to saying, okay, I've got a set of strategic vendors. Those strategic vendors will supply a large portion of the technology, and then I can plop in best of breed where I think it's going to create differentiation for me, or where it just fundamentally doesn't exist in the other platforms. So I don't think we consolidate down into a one vendor. And I actually don't think people even have one strategic vendor. I think they have several strategic vendors and then a small portfolio of startups. Because if not, you are acting like a systems integrator and you've got to deal with the complexity of all the technologies having different development curves, and one thing breaks, you fix it, and then another thing breaks because of the first fix. So we're moving there. And I don't know if we'll see a global panacea, but hey, here we are.
Right. Interesting you talk about startups there, and that I think, in the era that we're living in an era where some of the larger vendors have been apparently left behind by some of the newer startups and newer companies.
Yeah.
I mean, there's sort of the chattering class claims like, oh, the legacy vendors are dinosaurs, the startups are on the way up. But and so when you talked about this scenario, you definitely said that there's some startups involved in this. So does this whole idea of this integration, this is good for startups?
Oh, I think it's good for startups. And one of the things that I see happening, that's happened a lot in the Valley, is this concept of, better together partnerships, right? People that are doing best of breed things, but they come together. So for example, the other day I was looking at a press release from Salesforce and Box. It's a great
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
Box wants to extend their franchise. Salesforce has a great franchise and it's been known to partner with a bunch of startups to create an ecosystem that reinforces Salesforce within a company, right? So that's one example of you seeing that happen. I'm seeing that both software and platform companies are doing the same thing. So I think there's room for both. And what I think is happening now that's probably better for organizations is that larger vendors have gotten the memo.
Uh-huh.
They know that they
Right.
aren't doing some things well. They've actually migrated a lot of their things. I think cloud computing was one of the big elements where a lot of companies got taken by surprise, that redoing their software to live in the cloud, redoing their infrastructure to live in the cloud, making things more what I would call virtual, malleable, composable, all this sort of thing is a really
Mhm.
big shift for established companies, changing how people buy, the structure of how they buy. So we've seen a lot of that change happen, and that's been a multi-year journey for a lot of companies. And I think we're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation, but that innovation needs a channel to get it to market frequently, because there's certain fear about working with startups.
Mhm.
Sometimes your startup goes out of business, and that's
Right.
a legitimate risk, right? So how do you mitigate that risk? And some of how you mitigate that risk is making sure that your startup has a good partner that it could be working with, that might be an acquisition opportunity for it or something else, right?
Mhm. What do you see as a challenge as companies try to integrate mobile with cloud and big data, is there a typical sort of default stumbling block they usually run into, or is it a different problem for every company?
Yeah, well, obviously the first thing is the concept of trying to integrate mobile and cloud. I think the big stumbling block is that people have different technology roadmaps, and in
Hmm.
those technology roadmaps, they're frequently not looking at the other thing. So let's say I want to mobile enable my apps and services. There's probably a cloud team working on building a cloud strategy. So making sure that you interface with them, know what they're already going to have access to, knowing how that might help your efforts. Like, could you set up a dev test zone in the cloud because you're already going to have instances in the cloud running, is a great example of a missed opportunity if you're not talking. So there's a lot of those missed opportunities that the synergies are there, but people aren't talking to each other to know that they're there.
So in essence, if you're going to integrate these various elements, the company has got to be talking to itself, the various divisions of the company. So, okay, so that's a big stumbling block right there.
Hmm. Well, the larger you are, the more likely you have multiple buying centers buying the same thing from different vendors.
Mhm.
So
Right.
it's an interesting
Which,
challenge.
which brings up the idea of cost. I mean, think about, cloud computing, which in some instances is cheaper, but I think a lot of people say, well, if you're looking to cloud just to be cheaper, it's actually a better tool, so it may or may not be cheaper.
Yeah.
Is the idea of this integration, is this a cost savings, or is it more like, well, it's a better tool, it's a more flexible tool, so if you need to invest in it, so be it?
I think if we look back at previous computing generations, a lot of it was about efficiencies. We
Hmm.
had very inefficient architectures. What I think we're looking at now is, okay, maybe cloud saves you money, maybe it doesn't. Maybe, in the beginning, it's hard for people to say that mobile saves you money because you have to have a huge investment in it. But
Right.
what these things give you are agility, right? And agility is something that you have to ask yourself, where do you create business value? And is creating business value in how you assemble technologies?
In most cases, not for most
Most
companies.
cases not, right?
Right.
So that leads you to some more, as a service architectures. But there are certain things, there might be a specific process that you have to customize that makes sense for you, and that creates differentiation. But if not, you can take advantage of everything else that's underneath it, and you're not dealing with the maintenance, the support, the updates, all the things that take time that prevent you from figuring out what the next generation of products and services are, getting those out the door, making rapid changes to whatever those are. So we live in such an era of speed right now. It
Mhm.
just seems to keep getting faster. And I don't think it's just because I'm getting older, but I think it's legitimately
I think it's
faster.
clearly, I mean, it is going faster and faster. Sometimes I'm amazed by it. I was at the last, I don't know if it was VMworld. It was one of the last trade shows, and I went out to the
That's what I
exhibitor
saw
hall.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I went to the exhibitor hall, and there was probably dozens, if not hundreds, of new exhibitors there. And I walked through the hall, and I realized there is an explosion of new technologies going on, all of which, in theory, integrate with each other. And even myself, who follows it, it's almost mind boggling.
Oh, every day. And it's complicated, right? I mean, I think one of the challenges, and I was just talking to a gentleman from the Yellow Pages YP yesterday,
Hmm.
and that's an industry that obviously is going through quite a bit of transformation. They're trying to apply technology to that as well. But we talked a lot about one of the challenges being the complexity. Like you could just research technology all day. I mean, I do it, but that's my living. And I
Right.
think if you're an organization, you just don't have that kind of time. You've got to put a stake in the sand and say, here I'm going to do this at this time frame. And that's a risky proposition when things seem to be moving so quickly. So
What about the idea, the security piece of this? Is the idea of integrating mobile and cloud and big data more of a security headache, or is it solve some security problems?
the security problem is just a problem, but
Yeah, it
okay.
is. It seems like it will never go away. It'll be one of those never solvable problems.
Yes, this is true. There will always be somebody that finds a way to exploit. However, I will say I'm pretty optimistic about 2016 and beyond, and here's why. While I think there's going to be a lot of big security issues and people are going to have challenges, I'm starting to see technology that's really based on a more fine-grained identity of the person and the amount of devices they have and the contextual identity. So The bad news is I think we need to redo our security infrastructure, because our security infrastructure today is based around the concept of perimeter. There is no perimeter anymore. It's gone.
Right.
So if the perimeter's gone, we need security that's based in a framework that says if there's no perimeter, it's all about you and your gizmos.
Right.
And making sure that you, your gizmos, and the content that's on those gizmos are safe and secure. So I think we're going to have to redo a lot of the security infrastructure, but I also think some of that's becoming much more seamless. You know, the concept of multi-factor authentication. I've got my phone, I've got my wearable, you can do facial recognition on me. You don't just know that it's my face, but like, is that the way that Maribel moves? That seems odd, right?
Is
Is
that
that
Maribel's avatar, or is that really Maribel?
right? Are those the
Yeah.
keystrokes? Is that the way she types on the keyboard? You know, all these things
Mhm.
can come together to make us much more secure. It'll take time, but I'm optimistic that we actually have some loose ones now that could help.
What do you mean when you talk about fine-grained identity in terms of the individual and sort of this perimeter-less world we live in? Like we identify people through their fine-grained identity. It's like, which means what?
Yeah, okay, so we were just talking a little bit about that, but let me start with the context of where we are today, right? So where we are today, if you're in an organization, you have an Active Directory username and password, and that's kind of your gateway to the world. You type in your email, you type in a credential, you're usually done. If you're super secure, maybe you're putting in some kind of token, maybe there's some second factor of authentication, right?
Mhm.
So at least one of those can be compromised. If you're a consumer, all you have is a really poor username and password, right? If you have any password at all, right?
Right. I use my pet's name or my birthday, so I think that should be pretty safe, shouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly, right.
Okay.
And then you wrote it down on a piece of paper that was attached to the machine.
It's on a sticky on my computer screen, so it's safe and no one's going to break in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think if you look at that, that is something that is easily cracked, right? And and there's ways of, you know, I crack, you know, people have gotten very specific about how they get access to someone's machine and whose machine they get access to, because then they get the keys to the kingdom opened. But if we go to a world that says, okay, Maribel's calendar says she's supposed to be in the building at 9 o'clock, and there's somebody at the desk that is, you know, wearing the wearable that Maribel would wear, that has the smartphone that Maribel registered. Oh, gee, you know, it looks like it's Maribel with the facial recognition. You know, okay, we could say this is a little Big Brother creepy.
I was going to say, yeah.
That's a possibility. However, it's very seamless, and the question is, where do you use it, right? And how many of those functions do you use? So it could be something like, okay, it's my face, and it's a pin, and it's a registered phone or wearable. That's not too bad, you know. But maybe you don't want your fingerprint. Maybe you do want a fingerprint. Maybe you don't want your heart rate. Maybe you're okay with your heart rate. So I
Right.
think there's going to be, you know, for IT leaders, I think the challenge is figuring out that's not set up in your console today, right? There's no like button,
Biometrics or what the
click
person's
heart
pulse
rate,
is.
you know?
Yeah.
You don't
Right.
have the click heart rate button, and you don't have the click Apple Watch wearable button or click brand new wearable from such and such, right?
Right.
So, you know, you've got, does it have a digital certificate? And, you know, is it, you know, IMIE number, blah, blah, right? So you've got some of the things, but not everything you'd need today. And I think that in 2016, we're going to see much more sophistication around that, which will give us some opportunity to say, I've got a higher confidence based on these two or three things that that's the person that should be accessing these services.
It seems like it's going to be a continual sort of battle between sort of that big brother sense that we need to fight that bigger brother sense and really a lockdown security, which you can get. If you give into that whole big brother thing, you can get a really lockdown security. But where
Yeah.
do you find that balance?
Yeah. And like I said, some of the things are more personal and some of the things aren't. And maybe there's, you know, a certain set of opt-outs that have to happen where you say, okay, you know, in the building, if they're there with their username and password and they've got their smartphone within close proximity, that's good enough, right? Because they've already gotten into the building, they knew their username and password. They, you know, I knew that they had an Android or iPhone or whatever, and that seems to be close enough to the machine that it said, yes, I'm with the machine.
Right.
Okay, because who leaves without their cell phone anyway?
Right.
But,
Right.
so those, that might be good enough because you say, okay, there's enough security in the building. But on the other hand, if you are traveling and about, then there might be a different level of security that they require. So.
Mhm. Let's look to the future of this. If you think about integrating mobile and cloud and the future of enterprise mobility, I mean, what is this going to look like in a few years? And I guess from the standpoint of what should businesses be most focused on investing in if they look to the future?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Right now, we talked about these islands. Mobile is definitely an island.
Hmm.
And when I think of the future of enterprise mobility, I think of it as something that is just embedded in everything. It's not even talked about.
Right.
Nobody asks you if you have wireless in your PC anymore, right? It
Right.
wouldn't happen. Of course you have wireless in your PC.
Right.
I think we get to a world where it's like, of course my services are mobile, and they're everywhere, and it's just a matter of, are they on a big screen or a small screen, and how do I interact with them? And it becomes much more about the seamlessness of the security and the seamlessness of the interaction. So when I'm on, something like an Apple Watch, I'm not
Oh,
going to sit there with a stylus and go,
right. No,
right?
probably not. Yeah.
Different interaction model. But let's say we were having this chat. There might be something I do on here where, I just send you a message that says, hey, I can't talk right now. I'll get you when I hit the machine, or I'll
Right.
just say send to the machine and it goes to the machine. And then maybe I go somewhere else and it goes to the phone. So we talked about services portability before. I
Hmm.
think we're actually going to see that happen, and people will start to think of um, it's a process or it's an app, and it's workflow, however you want to call it, and it's just how it moves across the different devices. And that's the future of enterprise mobile, just knowing that you can have access to whatever that content is anywhere, but with the right format. It's a little bit of data on here, it's more data on the phone, it's more functions when I go to the big screen. There's probably even a scenario where I've got a glass wall, like what Corning talks about, and I could touch that, right? So, but it's the concept that will be able to show up and move with you everywhere and have some concept of what you did before.
Right. I'll be wearing my Google glasses and I can get my email, my Google glasses, and then I can transfer that to my smartphone easily or to my wristwatch easily, among other places.
Yeah, so you can see it, maybe in that scenario, you might like blink to ignore, right? So
Blink
I don't
repeatedly.
like you. Go away, go away.
That's the triple blink. Never a good sign, the triple
Yeah,
blink.
triple blink is delete or something like that, right?
But what are we talking in terms of timeline? When you sort of imagine this theoretical scenario you're talking about where it really does pass between platforms, is that 2 years away? Is that 5 years away?
I would argue it's already started.
Yeah.
And the reason I'd argue it's already started is, if you're within an ecosystem, I think there's still an ecosystem challenge. But, I happen to live in an Apple ecosystem. Some people live in an Android ecosystem. Some people live in a Windows ecosystem, right? If you're
Right.
in a Windows ecosystem, they've got this concept of continuum, right? And it moves from device to device to device. And that's even part of their operating system architecture. If you're in Mac, it's continuity. And it's, you can have your SMS go to your PC, or to your Mac in this case, or to your phone.
Hmm.
So we're starting to see some of that already. And we're starting to see some context around what gets surfaced where. Gee, I notice that when you're on this device, you're frequently pulling up maps at this time of day. I'm just going to have that as one of the frequent apps, right?
Right.
So we're starting to see that portability across devices. If you have the watch from anybody, it pretty much can, help you figure out like what's going on your phone or what's going on your PC, right? So we're
Hmm.
seeing it today. What we're not seeing it in is in enterprise apps.
Right. I guess that's the timeline we're looking for. Is that a year away, 3 years away?
I think it's 3 years away probably before you get anything meaningful,
Uh-huh.
but we'll start to see people really tire kicking. I've had a lot of calls, a lot of inquiries about what do I do with watch style devices.
Hmm.
Is virtual reality something that makes sense, or glasses, wearable glasses, like what's that look like? So we're starting to see people talk about that. People have great interest in Win 10 right now, and how
Oh,
does that change the structure of their apps and services? Like, should they
okay.
be building in a Microsoft world? Nobody was talking about that a year ago, but
Right.
now it's like, wow, who knew, right? In a year, you could turn the ship that fast, right?
Yeah,
So
I want to make sure we do a quick tangent. The virtual reality piece is just so interesting. And it seems like 2016 is going to be a big year for that. Do you have a sense of how that piece fits in?
I think it's going to be a big year for gaming and consumer. I
Hmm.
mean, it's really it's just about there, right?
Right.
And there's some fabulous stuff happening. I think we're miles and yards down for where that will be in an enterprise zone. And
Hmm.
actually, it only fits in certain places in an enterprise zone too. So, but people are definitely already trying to build prototypes of how you could use some type of glass or heads-up display or something to do field service, to do manufacturing, pick and pack, logistics and transportation style services. So it's starting to happen. That VR won't be widespread for all organizations, but I think we're going to see a great year for VR on the consumer landscape.
That's a lot of good stuff. Is there anything you wanted to say, a parting thought about enterprise mobility, things businesses should be thinking about as they look ahead?
I think the future is really bright. I think people are finally starting to do it. I think 2016 is all about building those contextual workflows where you're taking advantage of the device and in terms of using the location, using the camera, using the accelerometer, all those things that are there that are readily available to enhance business processes. So I'm looking forward to seeing what people create.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for speaking with us today. I'll send you the link. We can all tweet about it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Bye,
All right.
everybody.
Bye bye.